It is indeed a great spiritual gift, a grace from the divine to experience a quality of one's eternal self and to see at the same time one's illusory self. Durkheim calls it the essential self and the little self. There are many names for it. This is the real self of Gurdjieff versus the false personality. Maurice Nicole speaks of the experience as being high on a mountain and looking down on the valley below to all that we thought was ourselves, our self-importance, our sense of priorities. A true liberation from such a limited perspective, such a distortion of our true reality. It is something to be treasured. It is the heights of the human potential for discovering why we are here, who we are, whose we are, and what our journey is to be in this life. And this is where Gurdjieff has been very helpful in pointing out that throughout our life we have these high moments that mark our existence, which is otherwise lost in this hypnotic sleep and imagination. And that in fact we can find them to be some of the brightest memories, marking our past, something familiar to be found even in these mystical experiences. The trouble is that since we don't understand what has happened, we have no way to bring them back or even to value them fully for what they signify, which is a revelation of how we could truly be living. And so the whole purpose of these teachings and of all authentic spiritual teachings is to help us return to that. But of course, how can we return to something that is such a grace-given phenomenon, unveiling? And so we approach it by preparing the ground for the gift, for being receptive and sensitive to that moment, those moments when Spirit can fill us with this light. So how do we do that? This is where understanding the ultimate importance of work on ourselves, of purification, of self-observation, of understanding our dysfunction is part of clearing the ground. If we minimize our negative reactions, if we detach ourselves to some degree from our illusory sense of self, from our mechanical habits, from our automatic responses, from just being a stimulus response mechanism, we are creating a space. One might call it an inner sanctuary. That space which, to use the fourth way language, is observing I, is initiated by that. Where in that quietness of a more objective consciousness, we see what is happening, we understand why we are reacting this way, even if we can't control it or change it in the moment. Something separate is able to look at it and to laugh at it, to have mercy on it, and to begin the process of making other choices. But ultimately, all of this is to purify our inner space to receive these moments. And we are told, and it is the experience of some, I can speak for myself, that as we make these daily efforts to be present, to not be lost in the passing thoughts, to not be a victim of an emotional center that is not being used as an instrument of knowing, but just as a reacting mechanism, to live in higher parts of centers, to put it in fourth way language, we find that more and more often we are able to enter that third state of consciousness, that self-remembering. They become more frequent, they last longer. We are aiming for a more consistent and unified way of being that enables these connections, these alignments with the eternal self. The whole purpose of, or the whole result of devotion to God, of the path of theosis, as the ancient church calls it, is to live in that state. Now, the greatest saints will speak of themselves as nothing but the poorest of sinners, especially when others tell them how wonderful they are. And so that humility, that difficulty of rising up remains, and yet at the same time, we can know that we are meant to live more and more in that quality of being, which is our true self, which is our connection with God, which is the beauty of existence, the purpose of our being here. And so think of it as establishing a runway for Spirit to come into you and to illuminate you with these moments. And the more you manage to not identify, to not live in stress, the more you manage to be present to the beauty of existence in the moment, in the ordinary moment of life, the more you become transparent to the divine, the masters call it. And this transparency allows the immersion into that sense of eternal self, which is a high state of consciousness. And we are on this path to higher states of consciousness. Trust that more and more this will happen. And the more we discern the finer energies of living in the remembrance of the divine, of the sacred, the more we manage to not be victims of the gravitational pull of heavy energy, of negativity and identification and habits, the more we are capable of resonating to a reality in which we find that eternal self. Take time to be quiet, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. Slow down. Catch yourself when you start identifying so that you don't lose that energy, because these high moments require nuclear energy of our life force. And we don't have it most of the time because we've wasted it away during the day through countless forms of identification or misuse of energy. So value what energy you have in the day, because that is the fuel for those glorious moments and experiences that make life worthwhile and illumined with a light from beyond. This appreciation of our daily dose of energy, properly used, is fundamental to moving into a life where such possibilities become more and more frequent, because this is our birthright to live there, to know that. It is not meant to be a rare experience that we cannot contact again. Our whole motivation and willpower and love of God, love of the good and the true and the beautiful, should be focused consistently on that, because that is ultimately loving God, living in prayerful communion, simply by being that quality of self that we were made to know, and through that knowing to be useful to the universe in a very special way.